The world is changing, and the profession of risk management is changing along with it. No longer are decisions made in isolation. Now, risk managers operate in a way that emphasizes collaboration and enterprise. We have assembled a panel of experts to help illustrate this, to paint a picture of the future. Our story begins in 1880 in the Allegheny Mountains of western Pennsylvania. A land developer cuts costs on a dam. 6 years later, the dam collapses, causing the Johnstown flood, the deadliest in American history, claiming more than 2,200 lives.
I think one of the things we've really learned from this now is we measure the volumes of water that's going to come, and we prepare for that. We have all these different standards. Can this hold up to a 10-year flood? Can it hold up to a 50-year flood, 100-year flood? When they rebuilt this, they built this dam to a 500-year flood, and it held.
That is an example of how we learn from these incidents, and we've been able to create codes and loss protection and safety protection systems that have obviously saved a lot of lives and a lot of money.
In 1911, a fire in New York's Triangle Shirtwaist Company killed 146 people. There were no regulations covering fire hazards on the shop floor, and no emergency exits.
It was considered an assumption of risk to an employee to go into work and take care of themselves. There was no liability on part of the employer. There was opposition to workers' compensation, and that rapidly eroded after this fire because people saw how horrendous it was.
I think another factor is, remember, this happened in the biggest city in the country, in the biggest state in the country. New York felt some pressure to do something. Certainly the politicians would have felt some pressure to do something. So I think that had an impact on the regulations that came out of this and such.
In 1912, the Titanic went down, despite technology that led builders to declare the ship unsinkable. Although the case file remains open, claims to date have totaled less than $2 million in contemporary currency.
The recourses for families or survivors of the Titanic were probably similar to what they are today, except the end result is going to be much different because the causes of action that exist today didn't exist then.
I think that's true. I think they also looked at liability very differently. I think if you would look at a jury of our peers, their reaction is, wait a minute, you were off on the Titanic, you were off on a joyride per se. In today's environment, that would be a lot different. People would be much more sympathetic. People would look at negligence per se that occurs and find causes of action that would be able to recoup some of those costs.
It's evolved to the point now where it's considered products liability. It's held to a standard of strict liability. So if the ship goes down today, the passengers are all going to be paid, as opposed to having to go in and prove that there was some fault on the operators of the ship.
On May 6, 1937, the element of instantaneous mass communications was introduced. As the German airship Hindenburg landed, it was in full view of not only spectators, but newsreel cameramen and radio broadcasters.
Well, here it comes, ladies and gentlemen. We're out now outside of the hangar. The back motors of the ship are just holding it just enough to keep it from... It bursts into flames. Get it started, get it started. It's crashing. It's crashing terrible. Oh, my, get out of the way, please. It's burning, bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring mast, and all the folks agree that this is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's like 400 or 500 feet into the sky, and it's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. The smoke and the flames now, and the frame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity and all the passengers screaming around it. I can't talk, ladies and gentlemen.
What kind of efforts do you think went into the planning before the Hindenburg was even allowed to land in the United States?
There was probably no planning. There was probably just a decision to bring a political decision at that, to bring the Hindenburg in.
I doubt as a nation we even thought, oh my gosh, did we allow this to occur on our soil? Mm-hmm. Did we contribute to it somehow? That was the farthest thing from our thoughts. It's like, oh, Germany, you built a bad airship.
The Hindenburg was insured for less than $3 million in today's currency. With the payment of that sum, all claims were settled.
I think if we look at these disasters in review and we see there were not many regulations, not many supports in terms of workers' compensation, and a very limited amount of types of insurance policies.
So what happens now when a modern public entity wants to participate in expanding industry, or technology creates an entirely new set of risks? For the purposes of our discussion, let's consider a hypothetical event. A major international consortium approaches the San Francisco Bay Area with a new idea. It is looking for a place to land a modern-day high-speed airship. This transportation vehicle has captured the public's imagination with its speed and luxury. Its landing is expected to be a huge event, with all the risks you might expect.
Engaging in this discussion, I'd like to look at it from the point of view of how can we make this happen. But obviously in that context, we want to understand what the risks are that are involved and how we can address those. Sort of like an environmental impact report for risk management.
We're going to want to find a site that we can control, that we have the best control over.
Are we wedded to one site, or should we think of alternative sites?
Well, I think we should consider all the viable sites in the Bay Area. Personally, I've looked at it a little bit. I think that Treasure Island would be a good site to consider, again, because we have that control.
What are the other stakeholders and partners we want to bring to the table? Which entities do we need to draw upon to make sure that this can happen both successfully and so that none of the individual entities take the big hit in case it doesn't work?
Of course, we've involved the military. The Air Force is on alert in terms of the flight path and the security of the craft as it comes into the Bay Area. And then we have the CHP involved in the bridge security.
Sometimes a single event changes the entire landscape. For example, how would the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 affect the event that our experts are considering here?
I think that prior to 9/11, the risks that we thought of were only the day-to-day mundane risks, that you might have some gang violence, you may have some fist fights occur, but now there's always that concern of some major terrorist activity at the Bay Bridge, or to make a point, some explosion at the site itself.
Terrorist groups will target symbols, and certainly this would be a symbol, and the potential for a terrorist act would be very high, I would think.
When we think of disasters, we most often think of the victims and the aid they receive afterwards. Rarely do we take steps beforehand, when in many cases planning and preparation could minimize damage and loss of life, and could possibly avoid a disaster altogether.
So much of our insurance is based on paying out after something goes wrong. This is just a new paradigm. It's preventing it from going wrong in the first place.
We've also learned that none of these events happen or can be controlled strictly within a silo, that it's not just the general services or the construction department that has oversight and knows exactly what's going to occur. We understand that we have to fold in all our entities and all our departments to get the complete picture of the exposures.
And the collective synergy and intelligence of the group had helped me to think outside the box, and I think that caused everybody else to think a little bit further than they might have just on their own. It's glad that we have all the major players here today. It's all of our jobs to minimize the risk, and it's not just your job.
This program was produced by the Public Agency Risk Managers Association, an organization that promotes, develops, and facilitates education and leadership in public entity risk management. Major funding was provided by PERI, a nonprofit organization that connects local governments, small businesses, and small nonprofit entities with the knowledge, resources, and information they need to address their risk management challenges.